Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar, Defining Personas and Where to Find Them. I'm Ryan from Userlytics, the premier user testing platform to help you scale your research affordably. Today, I'm very excited to have special guests Dan and Lucas from Userlytics on our webinar. Dan is a UX researcher on our team with a lot of experience creating research studies, analyzing results, and delivering insightful reports to many of our clients. And Lucas is a team lead in our operations team, ensuring each and every test launch on the Userlytics platform is a success by monitoring studies and by working with our panel and occasionally third-party panels to source the right users for each one of those studies. In short, today Dan and Lucas will be talking about one of the most challenging parts of any UX study, sourcing the participants, who they should be, and where you can go about finding them. Just before we get going, I've got some quick technical stuff for you. First off, start putting your questions into the question section now. I'll see them, I'll keep track of them, and get them to Dan and Lucas during the Q&A portion of the webinar. I might sprinkle in a few questions in the middle of the webinar, but most will be saved for the end. The sooner you get the questions in, however, the more likely we are to answer them during the webinar. Also, in the chat section in just a minute, you'll see I'll place a few Zoom support pages. If you're having any problems with the audio or general issues, just click on those links and follow the instructions there. If you need some additional support, I'll work with you in the chat section to help you out as well. So I'll put those links in the chat in just a second. But with all that wrapped up, Dan, how are you doing today?
Hey Ryan, I'm doing very well. I'm excited to get started. First off, I just want to say hi to everyone and thank you so much for joining. As Ryan introduced me as, I'm one of the UX researchers on the professional services team here with Userlytics. And today we're going to be talking about personas as well as how to find them and how to best recruit them. So starting things off, we can kind of talk a little bit about what exactly is a persona and just developing the definition here just so everyone has some context. So a lot of times personas are showcased in this manner here. You can kind of think of them as a snapshot of your user or a user type, and they're pulled from actual users and real data that you have, either through user testing or market research or whatever assumptions maybe you have early on about your users. But essentially the purpose of a persona and the way to kind of represent them is as a fictional profile, kind of like a snapshot of your target users, and it's kind of meant to be a representative of kind of your user type or archetypal user. Something to keep in mind too as we move forward here, it is more than just market segmentation. It's not simply about gauging interest and trying to quantify that. It really is about trying to understand and represent your users as well as their values, their attitudes, their behaviors across use cases with your designs. Oftentimes here, as you can see in the image on the right side of your screen here, you can kind of see the main points to cover, just things to keep in mind to attribute to a certain persona. So a lot of it just deals with the background of your user, their age, their name, and this really helps make them feel more realistic. This helps them come to life, and essentially when you do pull it from real data, you are able to get really valid and representative user types or personas of your users. Some things to keep in mind, some things to include with your personas. Oftentimes you can synthesize the main points covered on the left side of the screen here, which are essentially their goals, their experience, their competency level, with just a quick tagline. So for instance, Mary is a 34-year-old middle school math teacher who wants to teach her students more effectively through easy-to-use remote learning software. And so from here you get a sense of not just a realistic sense of who your user could be, but you get a sense of their competency level, their background, what they're looking for, what their goals are. And with all of those things in mind, you can actually hold that as an ideal when designing and when doing research. And with that in mind, you can actually reap the benefits of the design rewards, basically in having a design that actually meets your target users. So one thing too I'll say is that a lot of times in order to help flesh out personas and make them feel more realistic, in addition to using qualitative and quantitative data that you pull from studies or market research that you've done, it really helps to just add a tagline or add a verbatim comment to a certain user type, a certain group, a certain persona, and actually have that real feedback and real quote coming from your users. It's a lot more compelling, it's a lot more identifiable and realistic, not just in the abstract, but when it comes to different team members are trying to understand their users, it's a lot more compelling and easy to keep in mind when you're actually trying to design and keep your users in mind when designing. So with all that in mind, it is important to make sure you're validating all of these attributes here. You don't want to overload your personas and have it be just arbitrary background characteristics. You want to have it focused on what's important to you in your design considerations and your capacity, and who you perceive to be your target users. So with all of that in mind, we can talk about the purpose and the value. As we discussed a little bit already, they are very helpful in determining your users' goals and painting a accurate representation of who you're supposed to be designing for. A lot of times we can get very hung up on our own either biases or our own things that we care about introducing to the design, but it's important to remember that we are not our users. And with personas in mind, with validating those personas through research and through testing, we can actually get an accurate representation of who they are, and we can only reap the benefits of that at the end of the process if we keep those in mind. The other thing too to keep in mind is that one benefit of a persona is that it'll oftentimes unite different teams across a company. So for instance, everyone has their own goals, everyone has their own niches, their expertise that they want to bring to the table. But if everyone is united under that kind of umbrella or that higher kind of ideal or unifying principle of the user should be who we're designing for, and we all have a good understanding and are on the same page about who the user is, then that's when you really see a cohesive team and a cohesive design by the end of it. So moving forward, when it comes to actually the process of creating a persona, we can first talk about collaboration. As I've said, it is really important to make sure that cross-functional teams are involved in the process, not just because, like I've said, it helps bring everyone up to speed and on the same page about who they're designing for, but when it comes to actually developing and writing out the personas and doing research for them, essentially being a collaborative effort basically makes sure that everyone is invested in the persona and in the user, and ultimately they care about not just the success and the utility and being able to use the persona as a tool, but they also then take that into account when thinking about who their user actually is, and always have that in mind when designing and working in their own expertise niches. So that's just something to keep in mind. Collaboration is very important. It brings together cross-functional teams. So moving forward, as a quick overview, when looking at the creation process, some key steps here are in validating your persona. So you want to make sure that you're pulling from real user data in order to validate whatever assumptions you have about your users. You want to make sure that they are accurate, because if you're building a persona to represent your users and it's based on invalid data or inaccurate data or limited data, then your design will suffer ultimately. So it's important to be able to account for those qualities and attributes of your users, and to really make sure you're specifying their goals, their behaviors, and what they care about. Something to keep in mind too is that while you're developing your personas and trying to validate them, you will learn more about your users over time with each new iteration. So for instance, if you come through with one iteration of design and it's time for testing it, and you're using the persona during testing and during recruiting, let's say you find out more information and a more developed understanding of who your users actually are. With that in mind, it's important to take this new data and refine your persona even further and bring it into the next iteration of design and testing. And with all that in mind, it's important to learn from that process of iterating and testing and researching, and really getting a good sense of the background, the demographics, and also the psychographics. So also, not just where they're from and what context they're using their design in, but what they care about, what their habits are, what their values are, in terms of the psychographics there. And as well, their goals and attitudes in general, what their preferences are, things like that, are very important to have specified and outlined in your personas. So moving forward, when it comes to getting that deep dive understanding of who your users are, like I've said, it is important to prioritize real user data. Oftentimes you can, as a first step, move from assumption-based personas, which, again, they are an effective first step, but if you really want to delve deeper and understand your users further, it is helpful to pull from real data, and it's essential the more complex your design gets. So this process helps you move from assumptions to data-based personas. And so basically, when looking at what type of data you can find to be helpful, so for instance, if during a user testing session, you have quantitative actual metrics, so you can see the magnitude of your findings to see, okay, a certain percentage of users value this, value aesthetics, value utility, whatever it is, ease of use, in your design, then it's important to understand the magnitude and the metrics behind it. But so too, it's just as important to understand the why and the qualitative side. And so that's when things like verbatim comments and certain quotes that you hear can become very helpful. It's important to make note of those things and assign them to and attribute them to and kind of map them onto your actual personas and who you have in mind as your user base. And then when it comes to actually evaluating all of that data and how to make sense of it, the most important thing is to understand the user groups. So for instance, if you do kind of an exploratory research study, you're likely to have a lot of diversity in your user types. And at that point, it really just is important in understanding who is your target user, who is the majority, who are you actually designing for right now in this iteration that we care about targeting the most and solving their solutions first. So you kind of want to start with that, larger net and work in from there and, fine tune things afterwards. But if you have that in mind and you're able to kind of look at the commonalities, look at the common attributes from the different users that you've tested and gathered research for, you can actually start to organize each user based on group, and you can start to formulate different groups of different types of users. And once those groups are turned into kind of user types, you can then turn them into more realistic personas. And basically that would just be a representation of your user group that you've identified through testing. And so looking at developing realistic personas, it's important to make sure you have the goals and the context of your users and their interactions with your designs down. And so when it comes to, how task specific or how general and kind of high level you should be, it's important to make sure you have that balance, obviously, but getting a general sense of what users typically care about when interacting with designs like yours. Is it efficiency? Is it aesthetics? Is it accessibility? Ease of use? Whatever it is, getting a sense of just general feelings and general values is very helpful for orienting yourself. But moving forward, when you actually want to test your specific design, it's very helpful to ground those generalities into something more specified across certain use cases or across certain tasks. You can often see, does a certain user have a preference or have a certain value that changes over time as they use different parts of your design? And it's likely to be the case that's true. So looking at and identifying kind of the moment-to-moment interactions, as well as their values and how they're changing and adapting, that's obviously very, very helpful and very important to keep in mind when referencing your specific product. So finally, when it comes to understanding the context, this is important because essentially you want to understand the context in which your users are using your design. And so are they using it alone? Are they using it a team? Is it professionally, recreationally? You want to keep in mind even just like logistical things like platform, whether it's mobile, desktop, whatever it is. And then also things like location, where are they most common to use your design? And you want to build all of that in and have that all be represented into your actual personas. So moving forward here, we get a sense of actually what is it like to refine and balance out your persona to optimize it to get the best results for you. Like I've said, you're likely to get diverse user types during more exploratory research before you've identified core user types. However, in further developing them and actually incorporating them into your personas, it's important to make sure that you're not too broad, you're not too specific. So for instance, if you're going too broad, you'll likely get a design that it's spread a little bit too thin, it's trying to cover too many bases, it's trying to solve too many vaguely and limited or vaguely specified problems that users are having and vaguely specified user types to begin with. And so if it's too broad, you're essentially going to be left with a design that lacks the focus necessary to actually address specific goals. And then the inverse is obviously true as well. Personas should be generalizable. That's kind of a key component here. They're meant to be representations, so they are kind of an abstraction, but they are meant to be also true to life and true to real users. So for instance, you don't want to restrict them too much. You don't want to have them too highly specified, because at that point you start lacking flexibility and you're no longer able to focus in and or generalize your personas outwards. And so obviously, when trying to get the just right approach, it's important to maintain that balance of flexibility and usability, and just make sure that you're having a focused approach that's also, has some external validity when trying to generalize them outwards. This balance essentially optimizes your persona to be useful and valid. And finally, when it comes to actually incorporating the persona. It's important to note that it's not just about user testing. It does come in the form throughout the entire developmental cycle of your workflow. And so, for instance, from the designing phase, from ideation, it's important to actually have the persona in mind from each step, from ideation to actually defining the persona itself, and through designing different parts of your design. And so, for instance, if you do so, then you're able to prioritize, what features your users actually care about based on the data that you have and based on your persona. You're able to collaborate amongst your teams and bring everyone together and make sure everyone is united across each stage of development, which is really important. And through it all, the main thing, again, in doing so, you can limit personal biases in your teams, but also you all have a unifying principle of who your user is. And when it comes to specifically for user testing, something that we care about a lot here at Userlytics, and we'll talk about very shortly, is how to best recruit based off your personas. You want to make sure that because your personas were derived from real data, you are able to validly use them in recruiting and make sure that the test results that you're getting, the data that you're getting, is in fact representative of your real users. So that's very important to note. You need to know exactly who you're recruiting and who it is that are going to be end up using your design in the end. So testing and research can build upon personas and often offer really detailed understandings, not just in general of your users, but of specific interactions with your design specifically. And finally, when it comes to reaping the benefits, you'll be able to move from assumption-based personas to data-based. You'll have a refined and developed and complex understanding of your users, while all being able to make them compelling and interesting and dynamic enough to be able to relate them to your team and keep them in mind when actually designing. So that said, when you're actually using those in your design team or design iterations, it's a cycle that does feed into itself. As I've said, once you're able to move from design to iteration to testing, you're able to continuously refine the process and continuously understand your users even better. And that will ultimately get you a design that focuses in on what your users care about, as well as understanding who your users are. And so with all of that in mind, I will now turn it over to my colleague, Lucas, who will talk a little bit about the recruiting that we do here and how we can incorporate the best user types for your studies. So Lucas, over to you.
Thank you, Dan, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. As Ryan just pointed out, my name's Lucas Fernandez, and I work here in the Userlytics operations team. We do many things in the operations team, but most importantly, we oversee the recruitment process and we make sure that we source the right participants for your research needs. So without further ado, I think everyone can see my screen. Let's dive into it and talk a bit about recruitment. So at Userlytics, our first go-to place for any type of recruitment is our panel. Why do I say this? I say this because we have one of the biggest and most responsive panels in the user testing space, with close to 1 million testers and growing very rapidly. When going through our panel, when trying to recruit, you can segment with predefined filters by gender, age, country, job role, industry, etc. We have many different ways of segmenting, but we also have a really cool feature, which we call tags, which allow us to, pardon the redundancy, to tag testers when they take screeners or participate in specific studies. This allows us to gather more accurate and very specific information about our panelists and really does facilitate recruitment in future studies. Finally, 86% of our testers speak at least a conversational level of English, but we also have many Spanish-speaking testers. We have Italian, German, French, Arabic, Portuguese, Dutch, Hindi, among others on the panel, sorry. And one of the good things about this is even if it's not an English-speaking country, we do have a lot of English-speaking participants in those markets. So what really makes our panel stand out? I would say it's the reach across all continents. So we are present in over 150 countries around the world. Naturally, the UX space is a bit more advanced in certain countries, specifically talking about Western markets. So the US, UK, even Australia are quick to come to mind. But I've been in the company for a little over a year now, and we've done research in countries like Trinidad and Tobago, Ecuador, Malaysia, Lithuania, Turkey, Russia, etc. So we really do have that global reach. Additionally, we have testers from hundreds of different industries in our panel, which is particularly useful for B2B recruitments. From our testers, the four biggest tester professions are computer software, IT services, and accounting, and healthcare. So this means that not only should you be able to recruit testers from different professional backgrounds and different walks of life, but the average Userlytics tester is quite tech savvy and has experience, generally speaking, in UX testing. So either they've been with our panel for quite some time now, or they also participate in other UX testing with other providers out there. But I would say that most importantly, what really sets your panel apart is the fact that it's fast. So we're able to get qualitative and quantitative insights for GenPop profiles in a matter of hours. And while naturally this is impacted by several factors, such as the specific profile, time of the day the study launches, the complexity of said study, even the length, country, etc., it's fair to say that by norm, we can recruit dozens of GenPop profiles in less than 24 hours in basically any country in the world. So please don't quote me on that, as there are times that for whatever reasons, this is not possible. But a safe estimate would be that at least 90% of the studies we can recruit and get insights for within the hour. Quant testing is a feature that we recently launched. I won't talk too much about it, but we're starting to see results come in within minutes. So it really, really is a very responsive and a very fast panel. Moving forward, there are cases, as you can imagine, where we just can't find the participant we're looking for through our panel. And in these cases, we have several options available. So the most obvious one, perhaps, is third-party panels. And what we've been doing is working hard on developing strong ties and partnership with different third-party panels across different geographies. And we do this mainly for two important reasons. The most obvious one is complementing our recruitment efforts for very difficult and narrow profiles, but it's really useful as well to accelerate time-sensitive testing. So whenever we need to be quick, we need to recruit, I don't know, dozens or hundreds of participants of a certain profile. This is also an option that we use. And while we always try to leverage on our panel's capabilities, it's really an awesome resource that's very handy to have. And without giving any names away, just wanted to say that we recently started collaborating with a panel of panels that has tens of millions of different potential candidates. So for whatever reason, if we can't source the participants through our own proprietary panel, we always have this resource at hand, which is very convenient. And in a similar fashion, but not exactly the same, we also partner with vendors and specialists. We have a strong relationship with them, and they help us mainly recruit very specific profiles that normally wouldn't be a part of third-party panels. So what am I talking about? Mainly C-suite profiles or any other high-level executive profiles. So they can be from, CEOs, COOs, investment fund managers, even aerospace engineers, even something as wacky as snowboarders in Japan. We can really recruit any profile that we want. Linking everything together, we have a team of dedicated recruiters. They have years of experience in the field, and they are key to maintaining these strong relationships with our panel and vendor providers. And what they can do is they can assist with anything really that's project related. So they can do dry runs, they can do demos, they can help troubleshoot, and they can provide fast support for both testers and clients. They can even help coordinate sort of special studies, for example, testing with minors. So we have a team of people that can really help facilitate all of this. Moving on, besides the more traditional approaches, we also have other courses of action we can take. So more than 95% of the times, we can really meet our recruitment needs directly from the panel. But for those rare cases where we need to leverage other resources for very specific recruitments, we can do it through the following ways. So we have a subscription with LinkedIn that allows us to reach out and communicate with very, very specific profiles. And this is very, very helpful for B2B recruitment. So let's say we need to find someone from Microsoft who's a cloud engineer. Well, LinkedIn would be the best way to go to find this type of profile. We can also use social media, other social media platforms to complement our recruitment efforts. Facebook groups we found are a particularly useful and a good place to recruit candidates. So just another example, a couple months ago, we ran a huge study where we were looking for pet owners in different European markets. We have a great system in place for recruiting participants that are outside our panel through a unique identifier link. So Facebook groups are really a quick and easy way to find targeted recruitments and participants. And similarly, with Facebook groups, we have Reddit and we can use other blogs that we've also had to resort to just complement our recruitment efforts. But not only do we have these tools at disposal, but we also have, if needed, the capability of recruiting backup testers for moderated sessions. So as I'm sure all of you know, tech issues do happen and no-shows are unavoidable from time to time when running moderated sessions. So this honestly is a very cool feature that not all of our competitors offer, but that our clients really do appreciate. So having that backup plan in case we have a no-show for whatever reason. Excellent. So now that we've looked or understood the different ways of finding the participants, let's talk a bit about how to actually take them to take your study and optimize the quality of insights that they're able to provide. So the first step is understanding our clients' needs. And while this may sound a bit of a cliche, it's particularly true in the UX space. Why do I say this? Many times we hear from clients and we get requests from them that are more aligned with market research rather than actual usability testing. Another good example for this is just a couple of weeks ago, we had a client reach out to us saying they wanted to run a quantitative test for 500 yacht owners in the Mediterranean. So when we heard this request, we kind of said, hey, let's take a step back. Let's really understand what you want, what objective you have, and let's propose something different to get those results. So yeah, whenever we have a situation like this, the operations team is quick to intervene. We advise clients and we suggest what the best way forward, obviously leaving the final decision up to them. But from our experience, making a real effort to understand what the client needs are, really understanding what's the purpose of their research and what insights they're trying to get, it really does yield better results from a UX perspective, almost in every case. Moving forward, the second step is the actual screener configuration. So we have a professional service team, and one of the many cool services that they offer is the possibility for screener design and implementation. Now, naturally, this has a small cost associated, although it's a very popular request from clients. I cannot stress enough how important having an airtight screener is for recruiting the right participants. This sounds really obvious, but sometimes a misplaced word or something as simple as the order in which questions are asked can be the difference between a perfect screener and a not so perfect one. So additional to this, our operations team is very hands-on when it comes to screeners and the overall recruitment process. So we review the screener of every single study that is launched on our platform. And that whenever we see something a bit, that doesn't look right to us or that raises some red flags, we're very quick to point that out to the clients. So an example of this is, we get this a lot. We see screeners that start, for example, with a question that says, are you a web designer? Yes, no. Whenever we see something like this, we contact the client and we can offer or suggest to them to add a couple of red herring questions to try to catch out any liars or any gamers. So we really, it's a self-service platform most of the times, but we're really, really involved with the whole setting up the screener process and making it sure it's as best as possible. So the third step, once we've actually polished the screener and everything's been set up, is to launch the actual study. So the operations team also gets really involved with the actual configuration and the actual setup and launch of the study. And we make sure that everything's correct, not only from a technical point of view, but also from a screener, task, logic, and kind of the way the study is built perspective. So a couple of examples, very often we see clients that, they want to just include a lot of questions in a study, although it might be a bit counterproductive because you lose the tester's interest if you just bombard them with many, many questions. And whenever we see something like this, we raise our hand, we flag it to the client and say, hey, look, we suggest that you either, synthesize this a bit, or you open up a different study, or you increase the study length or whatever. And then we can also recommend back-end configurations and small tweaks that we can do from the back-end, from the operations team, And for example, when testing with prototypes, well, we can configure a couple of things differently to show prototypes when doing mobile tests in a way that's more visual and more similar looking to what the actual prototype would be. So it's something that not everyone would do, but our operations team, they're really hands-on, as I said, and we really do guide the client or whoever's launching the research in every step of the way. And finally, a really cool feature that we offer is a quality assurance and a rating system. So contrary to many of other players in this industry, we don't automatically approve results as they come in. We have a very useful QA system in place where we verify that all the input we receive from the testers is valid and okay to approve. So this isn't a full audit, and we don't fully review the videos. We don't have the capacity to look at every single video that we get. We get, hundreds a day, but we do look at each result to make sure that the audio and video is working correctly, that the tester is in a professional setting or doing, in a professional setting, and is making a good faith effort for completing all the tasks. Unfortunately, from time to time, we do have a few results that slip in, but that's why we also have a star rating system that's very similar, for example, to Uber, where a client can rate the results once they receive them. So if you get a result, it passes our quick QA check, and you, for whatever reason, are not happy with the quality or whatever, you can give it a 1 or a 2-star rating, and the result will be sent back to our operations team, who will review the video more in depth and will replace it free of cost if needed. And finally, I won't talk too much about this, but I think it's an important FYI. If required, on an ad hoc basis, we can also offer specialized recruitment services. We can assign a dedicated project manager to your study, and we can just, help guide you in every step of the way. So this is very, very self-explanatory, but I just wanted to mention it as it's a useful good to know. And having said this, unless there are any pressing questions, I'd like to pass the floor back to Ryan, who is going to help take us to the next part of the webinar.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, Dan, Lucas, thank you both for that part. If anybody here has any additional questions, it'd be great to see. A couple have come into me privately, and I see we also have one in the Q&A. So we'll just kind of go through what we have. But anybody here who wants to keep asking questions, happy to take them. So one of the questions that came into me privately was from Alex, and it says, how long does it take to go from an assumption-based persona to a fully data-driven persona? And I think that question would probably go to you, Dan.
Right. So thank you so much for the question. As far as the time, I don't think there's necessarily a standard timeline for it. It really just is about how quickly or how validly you can put together a test and feel like, okay, these results are in fact representative of our users, and we have enough data points to bring them together and go from our assumptions and have actual solid measured groups that we can, or measured attributes that we can lump together into groups. And then from there, you no longer just basing it off of your initial instincts and assumptions. Now you have validated and supported, user types. So I don't necessarily think there's a specific timeline. It might just be, after one round of testing, after, you do one round of exploratory research just to get a sense of, okay, who is exactly using this after you've done your assumption-based testing. And then maybe you get a hint about, okay, well, actually, users are more leaning towards this way. And so you can kind of develop it over time. It might be after the first round, your assumptions might be dead on the first time around, but with room for improvement. And so I think that's kind of my perspective on it. If anyone else here on our panel would like to jump in and field that question, feel free to.
I think you gave a good description. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you, Dan. And as you can tell, I have a puppy in the background, so that might be the other person on our panel who jumps in. Sorry about that, everyone. The other question that came into me privately was from Shannon. It said, how many personas should we have? And I think that one also would be for you, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, kind of like I was saying in the previous question, a lot of times when you're doing that exploratory research, you'll end up finding out, okay, we actually have quite a few different categories, right? Because you're linking together and grouping together the different attributes and seeing, okay, here's one group based on, the type of user. Here's another. And so it really is just about identifying what the majority is and identifying your target user. And so when you're actually developing a persona specifically, you do want to make sure that you're specifying to one user type over another. Now you can have multiple different personas and it can be evenly split. Let's say it's a third user type 1, a third user type 2, another third user type 3. Then in that case, it's perfectly acceptable and beneficial to develop personas for each one of those users. But when you're actually thinking about design iterations and you're actually thinking about testing, you want to make sure that, for instance, when you're recruiting for a research study or for user testing, you want to segregate them depending on how much in-depth data you want, but typically you would want to make sure that you're honing in on each individual type of user to make sure you're getting really specific and complex data based on each one and further develop them over time. And with that in mind, you can obviously do another research study where you're putting them all together and seeing, okay, here's the breakdown of different perceptions based off who we expect to be our representative users in the long run, or the end users in the long run. And so it is kind of an as-needed basis, and just getting a sense of who are your actual users, how many groups do you think that you were able to formulate when actually going through the data and putting them together based on their commonalities. And so I think that's kind of my perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dan. I see a couple questions here in the Q&A section as well. Look like they're both probably in for you as well. So we'll just keep these going to you, Dan. But
right,
Julia asked, Julia asked, could you provide more context on the difference similarity between user types and personas?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say overall, it's important to recognize, personas are derived from user types. So you can think of it in terms of once you've done your research, you have these certain user types, and then it's just about representing them. And so a lot of times personas are just a tool that's being used based off of real data from your user types to incorporate into your design process to make sure that, user-centered design is at the forefront of everyone's mind, and you have a realistic and compelling and relatable and identifiable and specific understanding of who your user is. And so it is, a fictional representation of your user, but it is kind of it's still derived from that earlier data that you've received.
Fantastic. And the last question we have here right now, unless anybody else has any other questions they'd like to go in and put in either the chat section or the Q&A section. The last question we have here looks like it's also aimed at you, Dan. How do you start building personas if your company hasn't run any usability research? Can you use old research from surveys and interviews? Will that be relevant?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really just depends on what specific research you have. If it is, in keeping, if it is a previous iteration, then absolutely, it's definitely very beneficial and important even to look at previous studies that you've done, look at previous research that you have, so long as it is applicable and valid to bring over. It sounds like in this case it would be. So absolutely, it is very helpful to look at your previous data and pull from, let's say you have verbatim comments from previous study that you've done. Write all of those out and start grouping them by type. If there's a certain percentage of comments that focus on, wanting more flexibility in a design, then now you have a first step in developing, one user type that cares about flexibility. And from there, you can start to add the other attributes onto it. But yeah, that's a great question. And absolutely, you want to be able to pull from whatever data you have available to you.
All right, thank you. It looks like we just had another question come in too from Nate. If our company isn't sure what persona profiles are, is Userlytics able to help me define this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would hope that part of the process has been established today. And so when it comes to actually, meeting, oftentimes, especially in the professional services team, we'll meet with our clients and help design research studies. But the first step is trying to understand what their needs are and who their users are. Oftentimes, clients will have, a fundamental, at least, understanding and orientation about where to take their research process based off their initial understandings of their users. But in terms of helping, our clients establish that even further, that's kind of the first step, right? Is meeting with them, understanding their needs, and developing maybe an exploratory study where we just recruit a more broad base of people that we know for certain to be a target user, although maybe it's limited and not essentially too specified as to a more core target audience. But we can start more broad and gradually refine it and be a part of that process. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. I'm not seeing any other questions here, so I think this is probably towards the end. If anyone wants to throw in one real quick, happy to look at it. So as we're kind of out of questions, once again, Dan, Lucas, thank you so much for all the presentation you gave, answering these questions, going at it. This has been fantastic. And to you who did stay all the way to the end of the webinar with us, thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to learn with us here. We hope that between the informative talks that Dan and Lucas gave and the detailed Q&A just now, you'll be more confident in finding the users you need for your next study. We will be sending this recording out in an email in the coming days. Full recording will be in there. If you have any questions in the meantime, go ahead and reach out to UX at Userlytics. Any questions about personas, you can direct those to Dan. Any questions about our platform or panel, we can direct those to Lucas, or any other questions kind of just about our services in general, we'd be happy to help out. So I'll put that into the chat right now. And that way, if anybody has any questions or wants to go anything more, you can go ahead and reach out to us directly here. But as I said, here in the next coming days, we'll have this recording come out to y'all in full. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and hope you all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.